You're listening to Change Your POV Podcast, episode 148.
I mean, I didn't want anyone to know that I was, a failure, that I was a self-published author. But what happened was I logged back into my Amazon account a month after that, and I saw that I had 11 sales. And that for me was a life-changing moment. I mean, I was jumping up and down. I was so excited. Like, I was just thrilled. I was ecstatic because I knew, look, if I can sell 11 books without telling anyone in the world what I had done, imagine what I could do if I treated this like a real business.
Hello, folks, and welcome to Change Your POV Podcast. I am your host, Eddie Lazary, and I am doing a solo show interviewing the one and only Tom Corson-Knowles. Now, Tom reached out to me just before the end of the year and said, hey, man, I really think that your audience would like what I have to offer in terms of knowledge and resources. And so I looked at Tom's stuff, watched some of his YouTube videos, opted into some of his funnels, and I gotta tell you, I have a lot of people that approach me to come on the show, and I do bring on some guests that that approach me, but oftentimes it's one of those things. As a podcast host, I want to make sure I'm bringing the best value to you, the listener. And after spending some time looking at Tom's stuff, I was like, man, this is really cool. There's a lot of folks out there listening to this that are going to be able to benefit a lot from what Tom has to say. So Tom is the best-selling self-published author of more than 20 books. He went on from publishing his first book to earning more than $12,000 in a single month from ebook royalties alone in just 12 months. He teaches authors, entrepreneurs, and experts how to turn their knowledge and stories into books and become best-selling authors themselves. He is the author of one of those books is Destroy Your Distractions, which I'd like to talk about here in a minute. And he's also the founder of TCK Publishing. How are you doing, Tom?
Awesome, Eddie. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, no problem. This is really cool. So before we get too deep into your story, I would like to say thanks to this week's sponsor, Audible.com. Now, folks, if you're not familiar with Audible.com, they have over 180,000 titles to choose from every kind of genre you can possibly imagine, from fiction, nonfiction. They've got novels, short stories, self-help books. I mean, if you're into cooking, if you're into entrepreneurship, online marketing, I think there's even books on there that you'd be able to get and learn about, publishing and writing books as well. I would recommend, though, going over and checking out Tom's stuff first. But Tom, what are you reading and or listening to right now?
It's a couple of great books. So one is The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. It's an incredible book about really like your mind, like that voice in your head, and kind of learning how to be present and how to, get past, emotions and old beliefs and old thought patterns and bad habits, and how to get through that so you can really live life to your full potential. So that's a great book I recommend for everyone. And then another one I'm reading right now is Drive by Daniel Pink. The subtitle is like The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. And it's just a fantastic book, especially if you're like building a team of people to figure out, how do you get your team members, your employees, your contractors to work on your business, on your projects as passionately and as excited as you are about it, right? How do you actually do that? And it's not about how much money you pay them. It's really about so many of these other factors that get people, connected to your purpose and your mission in life.
Yeah, thank you for those recommendations. I will definitely add those to my wish list on Audible. Anytime I'm recommended a book, I just go onto my phone under Audible, and I find the book, I click add to wish list. That way I don't have to try to remember it for next time I'm looking for a book to listen to. So folks, if you don't already have Audible, I highly recommend you do so. And I've got something special for you. You can head on over to changeyourpov.com/free book. And when you're there, you can sign up for your free 30-day trial. And when you do that, you'll also get a free audio download. So you can go ahead and download one of those two books, The Untethered Soul or Drive. Thanks, Tom.
Absolutely.
All right. Now, I have to ask, how did you get into this? It's not like you just woke up one day and said, I think I'm going to self-publish a ton of books, figure out the process. Yeah, learn to earn royalties and become successful. I mean, nobody in school, right? No teacher ever says, what do you want to be when you grow up? And somebody raises their hand and says, I want to author, self-published books. Like, how did you get into this?
Yeah, totally. Definitely didn't learn it in school. Actually, it was school that drove me to write my first book. So I was in business school at Indiana University. In my freshman year in the honors program, I realized that all of my classmates, like their dream, like everyone in the honors program, their dream was to go to Wall Street and become investment bankers. And this was like 2005. So this was like right before the financial crisis hit pretty much. And, that was their dream. They wanted to earn six figures right out of college, working 100 hours a week in a cubicle. And their dream just seemed like my nightmare. Like there was no way I was ever going to be happy in that kind of lifestyle, working those kind of hours, doing work that I didn't think really added value to people's lives. And so I was so freaked out about my future and what it would look like that I just kind of reflexively opened up this document on my computer and just started writing out my values, what I thought it meant to be successful, what I thought success looked like for me. And so for me, it was, obviously financial freedom, having lots of money to be able to do whatever I want to do and support my family. But beyond that, having time freedom, the ability to go where I want, when I want, wherever I want, with who I want. And also, good health, the ability to just be healthy and happy and take care of my health and not overwork myself and not have a really stressful kind of lifestyle. And all these other things, relationships and doing work that was meaningful, all these things that I thought were crucial for me to live a happy, fulfilled life. I just started writing them down in this document. And I never imagined it would be a book, but I shared it with a few people and they said, this is amazing. You should turn this into a book. This should be, a book where you go out there and you get it published. And so I tried to go the traditional route, which is, you find a literary agent to represent you, to pitch your book to publishers, and then you write a book proposal. And that's what they use to pitch your book to major publishers, and then you get a book deal. Well, I was one of those, 99.9% of authors that never get a traditional book deal. So after 6 years of kind of banging my head against the wall, trying to get a deal, trying to get an agent, just never worked out for me. I pretty much gave up on my dream. And that was until about 5 years ago, a friend just mentioned in a casual conversation, why don't you just self-publish your book on Kindle? And I had no idea it was even possible. That was like a big light bulb moment for me. And so I read everything I could on the subject, uploaded my first book to Amazon. And the thing was, Eddie, like I was so embarrassed I had to self-publish my first book that I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. Right? I didn't want anyone to know that I was, a failure, that I was a self-published author. But what happened was I logged back into my Amazon account a month after that, and I saw that I had 11 sales. And that for me was a life-changing moment. I was jumping up and down. I was so excited. Like I was just thrilled. I was ecstatic because I knew, look, if I can sell 11 books without telling anyone in the world what I had done, imagine what I could do if I treated this like a real business. Mm-hmm. What if I got up every day and committed to writing great books and to marketing and building my platform? And so that's what I did. And that's how I went from, 0 to 12,000 plus a month. And, actually it was 10 months. So I had my first $12,000 month from the time I published that first book. And so that's how I got started. And it was just that roller coaster ride from the beginning. But it all started with that kind of moment where I realized, look, if I can sell 11 books without doing any work, imagine what I could do if I treated this like a real business. And that's what I did. Yeah.
So the revenue that you generated, was that from just marketing the hell out of that one book, or was it from writing a bunch of books after that?
Yeah. So it was writing several books. So I actually, on my computer, I've been a writer like my whole life. So I had, when I uploaded my first book to Amazon, I already had 12 manuscripts on my computer, sitting in a file somewhere like almost totally written and edited, and some were half written and some were just a couple of paragraphs. But I had 12 manuscripts sitting there on my computer, and I had no motivation, no inspiration to actually finish them because, there was no way I was ever going to make money from them. There was no way I was ever going to get them published. And so when I realized that I could actually get this work published and I could actually go out there and make money and sell these books, I got up every day and was working on my next book, polishing that manuscript, getting it ready to publish. So by the time I had that first $12,000 month, I think I had about 10 books published.
And then we're all published on Amazon?
Exactly, yeah.
Nice. Now, did you notice that you were able to build more momentum with more books? Did marketing become easier, to become more challenging?
Absolutely, yeah. It's way easier. So like with anything in business, once you have an audience, once you have a list of customers, mm-hmm. the easiest thing in the world to do to increase your revenue is just add on new products and services to sell to your same existing database of customers, right?
Right.
So, whether you're an author or whether you sell nutritional supplements, like whatever business you're in, once you have an audience who loves you and loves your products and loves what your company does, the easiest thing in the world is to continue adding more value to them. And that's how you can increase your revenue exponentially.
Nice. Now, I mentioned that the bulk of my audience are veterans, and many of them I speak with, they would love more than anything to capture their stories, whether it be, stories of combat, stories of their coming home, stories of their successes and or failures, once they've gotten out of the military. And everyone just feels the need, that desire, and I be honest with you, I'm one of them, just feels the need to capture it for some reason, whether it's for posterity, whether it's a way to say, I left my mark on the world, whether it's to, maybe just for their family members later down the road as a way to carry on a legacy. I mean, many people are motivated by many different things to write a book, but let's talk briefly about the actual process. Then we'll get back into the motivation. But the biggest problem that most folks that I speak with have is they say, I don't know where to start. They know they want it, they have the desire, but they don't even really know how to begin that process. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Definitely. So I'll walk you through the process that I use and that I teach, and it'll definitely work for you if you follow this. And so the first step of my process is all about, everything starts with an idea, right? It's all about having creative new ideas to work with. And so the first thing I do is I sit down, and I call it thinking time. So when I do a thinking time process or a brainstorming process, I close the door to my room, no interruptions, no distractions, no cell phone, no computer, no internet, just me and a pen and paper. And some quiet space to really think. And I write down on the pen and paper, what questions that are going to get me to think about what I need to do. And so in the case of writing your first book, the first question I'm going to ask is, okay, what could I write a book about? What am I an expert in? What stories could I share with the world? What message could I share with the world through my book? And start to just jot down all the different ideas that come to mind. And I found this is really important because if you're anything like me, you're a really creative, kind of ADD, ADHD person,
yeah.
You probably have a ton of ideas, right? And the biggest problem I found for myself and a lot of other creative folks is that we often get distracted by how many ideas we have. And so what I found is that when I organize all my ideas in one place, in one journal, in one Evernote file on my computer, I always know that if I ever feel like I need a new idea or if I ever need a new project, I've always got that list there of 50 new book ideas I can work on, right? And so I never feel like that next idea I get in the shower is that one idea that's going to make my life successful or not, right? I never feel like I have to do one thing because I've got so many ideas built up. And so I found that having kind of that database, that knowledge that you've got, all your best ideas locked down in one place gives you the confidence to know that you can really focus, the next 90 days on just one project and get that done. And you can always come back to those other ideas later on, because the biggest mistake a lot of creative folks make is they start a new project and then halfway through they get this shiny new idea and they go chasing that new project and they never get anything done, right? So that's where you start, is by getting down all the ideas you have in one place. Have one journal, have one file on your computer, or like me, do both, where you have it all locked down so it's all secure. You've got all your great ideas there. And then once you've got all your ideas in place, that's when you kind of come back and do another thinking time session where you're going to analyze all your ideas and find that one idea that you really want to focus on right now. Because if you're focused on 20 different projects at once, you're probably not going to do any of them very well, right? And so once you've got 20, 30, 40 book ideas, you can go back to your list of ideas. You can analyze them and say, out of all these ideas I have, what is the most important one for me to share right now? What is the one I'm most excited and passionate about? What is the one I think will make the biggest impact in the world? Which one do I think will make me the most money, right? And ask all these different questions to figure out and analyze, out of all the ideas you have, which are the best ones, or which is the number one project you really want to focus on right now. And so another part of that kind of analytical process is you really want to do market research, right? And I don't like the word market research because in business school, we learned about market research and it's the most boring topic ever. But in reality, market research is the most fun thing ever, because it's all about understanding your customer, understanding where the money is going to come from, and understanding your relationship to your audience, to the people that you're serving, right? So if you're going to write a book about, a memoir of your story, your time in the military, your time in combat or whatever, go to Amazon.com, type in, army memoir or war vet memoir or something like that, and find all the best-selling books in your field that you're planning to write about, and study them, right? Study these books, look at their titles, look at their subtitles, look at their book covers, read their book descriptions to see how they get people interested in actually buying those books. Read the first 1 or 2 or 3 pages of the book to see how they get the reader drawn into the story. And then the other thing you really want to do, and this is gold, is read all the reviews. So have a notebook with you and read all the reviews of all the best-selling books in your market, and jot down all the common themes that readers mention again and again that they love about those books in your market, and write down all the common things that they hate about those books in your market. And what you'll see if you do this is you'll see a crystal clear image of what your customers want in this market and where the gaps are in the market, where there are places where other authors and other books out there aren't fulfilling the needs and the wants of your ideal readers. And if you do that, that will give you the key ideas and insights you need to create a book that's not just going to sell well, but is really unique and will add massive value to your audience.
Yeah, so just real quick, as an example, what would be a couple of things or themes, as you call them, in the reviews as you go through and you're skimming through or you're reading these reviews? What are common positive themes, and what are some common negative themes that you've come across?
Well, I'll give you an example for one of our clients' books. So we published a book called Unlimited Memory a couple of years ago by Kevin Horsley. And he's like this memory expert, and he broke this world memory record. And when we were doing research for his book, we read all the top reviews of all the top memory books on Amazon. And the common negative theme that was coming up again and again and again for every major book in that market was that it was too long, it wasn't enough detail, there wasn't enough action steps, there wasn't enough, how to actually improve your memory. It was lots of stories and lots of fluff and lots of, it was just long prose. 300, 400, 500 page books on improving your memory. And so when we were working with our client on this, we said, hey, look, this is what all the other books look like in this market. So I think the best thing to do would come up with a shorter book that's all focused on action steps and how to, and the exact little steps that you took to improve your memory, so that people can just follow it along and don't fill it with lots of stories and stuff that's totally irrelevant to the reader. That's not going to help them achieve the goal, because what they're saying they want is just a quick, simple book that's going to tell them how to achieve better memory, how to improve their memory skills, right? And so that book has been a runaway bestseller since we published it, over 50,000 copies now. And I think a big part of that is because we wrote the book and we designed the book to be unique in that marketplace, to fill that gap in the market that wasn't being filled by other books out there.
Now, it sounds to me like in that particular instance, you actually started with the what not to do and then eventually got to what to do. That may be counterintuitive to a lot of people listening to this, yeah?
Maybe. You have to, every book is totally different. Every market is totally different. You talk about, a lot of the advice I can give is only general, because we're talking about, general concepts.
Sure.
But I think, every situation is unique. And so, for Kevin, writing that book, he knew what was going to be in that book. He knew all the top strategies to improve his memory. He's an absolute expert in that field. So it wasn't really a question of, what is the important stuff he needs to have in the book. I think the question was, how do we make that book unique, and how do we make it stand out from everyone else out there? And how do we organize it so it's the most valuable book it can possibly be for his audience, right?
Right.
And I think that's a big part, especially for nonfiction books, is not about what information is in your book, but how are you going to organize and structure that information and make it most useful to your reader? Mm-hmm. Because you can have a fantastic book that's 1,000 pages long, and 99% of your readers will never read all 1,000 pages of it, right? And so they're not going to get the same value out of it as they would if you could condense that same information into a shorter book, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. And I brought up the starting with the negative first, because I know some folks that actually sell physical products on Amazon, and they've done that quote unquote market research where they've gone and look at competitors' reviews, but they focused on all of the 4 and 5 star reviews to see what everybody was liking about their product. And they kind of forgot about reading the negative reviews to find out what were some of the things that the consumers or the customers didn't like, right? And so I think it's important to do both. You can't just look at all the positive things and try to replicate that. But you also have to look at where are the gaps, what is missing, and try to figure out how you can incorporate that into something that you're doing in order to differentiate yourself, right?
Definitely. In my experience in business, it's really all about solving problems, right? The bigger problem you solve and the better you solve it and the more people you solve it for, the more money you're going to make, right? And so for me, it's just kind of natural to go to the most negative reviews and the most negative comments to find out where the problem is, where are the pain points for our customers. Because if you can solve those biggest pain points that no one else is solving, I mean, that's how you have a huge business right from the beginning, because you've solved a big problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my example is with the veteran community. There's a lot of information out there about people that are assisting veterans become more productive and be more successful in their transition out of the military. And one of the biggest struggles, pain points as we call them, that the veterans come up against is this idea of converting military experience into civilian terminology. And this is prevalent in interviews, on resumes, even in written communication like emails. And everybody's advice is, you need to convert your military experience into civilian terminology. And it's like, I have this like, no shit moment, right? Like, duh. I mean, obviously that's what needs to happen. But the problem, the big pain point is how? How does that happen? The actual, the tangible, actionable steps of how to actually do those things that you're recommending. And I think that's what we're really talking about here in terms of these books and being a successful author, is being able to provide as much value to your readers as possible, not just in theory, but in action, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's a very common struggle that authors have as well, especially, doctors and attorneys, people who are absolute experts in their field. They know all the industry jargon, they know all the research, they know all the science. But, to be able to communicate those really big, important ideas in a way that someone without a high school diploma can understand easily and quickly, that's a skill that not everyone has. And so I think it's very similar. Like, a key to success in life is to be able to communicate with other human beings, and especially human beings from totally different backgrounds and totally different experience levels and totally different knowledge levels. And so I think that is kind of the great struggle of being human, is learning how to communicate better with people. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits actually of writing a book. I mean, for me, if I had written all my books and never made a dime from it, it would still have been one of the best experiences of my life, because the process that you go through to write a book, to clarify your ideas, to clarify your values, to make sure that what you think you're communicating is what your reader is actually understanding, that is a skill that will prove valuable in every area of your life, in every conversation with you have in business, in the military, in personal life, in your relationship with your wife and your kids and your family. I mean, it's going to change every area of your life, being able to communicate better with other human beings.
Yeah. So we got step one, and that is come up with an idea, come and set aside some thinking time, basically doing a brain dump of sorts. And then step two is to do some analysis, do some market research, read all of the reviews. And then what's our next step?
Yeah, so once you've done your market research and you've honed in on that one book idea, you're going to focus on that one idea. That's when you go back again to that right brain creative stage. So you're going to do another thinking time process where you're going to start brainstorming all the ideas that you're going to include in your book, right? So it's the same thing we did before, except instead of thinking about all the different book ideas we have, we're going to think about all the different ideas and all the stories and elements and scenes and so forth that are going to be in our book, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're just going to brain dump every single idea you have for content, for ideas, for stories, for information to share in your book. And once you've done that, and usually, 15, 20 minutes is all you really need. This doesn't have to be a big, complicated, drawn-out process. The key is to just get a good plan, right? I mean, a good plan today is better than a perfect plan tomorrow. And so just getting as many ideas as you can in that first stage on paper. And then the second step is, take a break from that, maybe an hour or a day, sleep on it, come back and again go to that analytical phase. And that's when you're going to go through all those different ideas you have to include in your book, and you're going to try to organize them into some kind of coherent structure, right? A lot of people will call this an outline. And so you can do, chapter 1, scene 1, whatever it is, whatever type of book you're writing, and try to just organize all these different ideas you have into what is the most logical structure? What is the most logical way to organize this information so that a reader who knows nothing about me, knows nothing about the story, knows nothing about these topics can easily follow along from page 1 to the final page of the book and understand it as easily as possible. And again, you don't have to get it perfect. You're just trying to get this basic structure in place. And the idea here is, and really the key here is that when you sit down to start writing your book, you have this map, right? You have this blueprint of this outline of your book of what you're going to do. So that every single day you sit down to write, you know exactly what you're going to write about because you've already outlined it. You've already got a plan in place. And so, the biggest, common complaint with new writers is that they've got writer's block. They don't know what to write about. And in my experience, once you go through this process and you have your outline down, you're never going to have writer's block because this is chapter 1, this is chapter 2, this is chapter 3. And so all you have to do is just sit down and write about those ideas that you've already planned to write about in the first place. That's
excellent. Now, when you're actually going through the writing process, you've got your outline, so you have a rough guess or a rough sketch on chapters. Now, do you start with chapter 1 and you just keep on going and you don't look at any other chapters until you're done with chapter 1? Or do you kind of sit down that day and you write, something comes into your head, but you know that it's probably fits better in chapter 3, for example. So you kind of go over to the area where you've earmarked chapter 3 and you kind of capture that thought. And then you go back. I mean, do you bounce around a little bit? I mean, what's your strategy? I mean, everyone that's going to write a book is going to have a different, unique strategy. But for those that have never written a book, just what are some different ideas and different ways that experienced authors go about doing this process?
So there's no pretty way to do it, right?
Yeah.
This is a great quote. I don't know exactly how to say it, but it's like, don't be afraid to make a big mess, right? Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with taking action and getting in there and writing chapter 3 and then going to chapter 10. And I think, some days I just write what I'm inspired to write. So I might be, doing my morning workout, my morning routine, and then I just have this idea like, oh, I have to write this chapter in my book right now, this passage in my book right now. And so it might not be in order of what I've been doing before, but I'm just so inspired with those new ideas, I want to write them down right away. Other times, I don't really know what I'm doing, right? So I'll go, I schedule my writing time in my calendar. I'll sit down at my computer at 9 a.m. or whenever I'm going to write my book. And I don't really know what I'm doing until I look at my outline and say, okay, well, I stopped here on chapter 3, and these are the main ideas in chapter 3 I need to write about, so I'm just going to work on that now. So I don't think there's any right or wrong way to do it. But I think that's why it's so important to have that outline in place so that when you do have those days where you're not 100% inspired and you don't know exactly what you do and you don't have a clear plan, you can go back to that plan you've put down so you know what the next step is to take and you can actually, implement that and start taking action right away.
Yeah, I just think the main takeaway there for the first-time authors that have never done anything like this, to know and to hear someone like you, Tom, that's experienced in this, to say, it's okay to bounce around. It's okay to go from one chapter to the next, from one idea to the next. It's okay to make a mess because a lot of people get frustrated because they don't know if that's like okay or something that they should be doing. And so they focus on just that chapter 1. And when they get stuck, even though they may have good ideas for other, elements of different chapters, they feel like they're obligated to complete chapter 1 before they move on. And so they get frustrated, they put it down, and oftentimes they just never come back to it. And so I really think just that main takeaway there is to know that there is no right or wrong way of doing it, but it's perfectly okay to kind of jump around. Now having said that, when you are jumping around, you may have an outline, but you still got to find a way to keep things organized as you're moving through the process. Do you have a specific tool like on your computer, or is this all on just pen and paper at this point?
I do all my writing on the computer. In terms of like writing books, I do it all on my computer. I do like my outlines, my brainstorming, that's all done on pen and paper. But when it comes to actually writing the book and writing articles and passages and blog posts, I do that all on the computer. And I use Microsoft Word because that's what I grew up with. It's simple. It's easy to use. I know that tool. So if you've already got a word processing tool you love, it's fun to use for you, use that. If you don't have a tool yet and you want like the best tool for the pros, there's a great tool called Scrivener, which a lot of authors really love. For some folks, it's too complex and too complicated. And for me personally, like I just don't really want to learn a new tool. Like I'm more than happy with one I have now. But if you want to learn a new tool and have all the advanced gadgets and stuff, that's Scrivener is a great tool. But I think the most important thing is not which tool you use, but it's understanding how to use your tool most effectively, right? And I've seen authors literally waste thousands of hours editing manuscripts by hand. Like, instead of maybe they put like 2 spaces at the end of every sentence instead of 1. So they have to go through and hand delete all those extra spaces when you can just use the find and replace feature in Word or any other word processor to automatically delete all those extra spaces for you, right, in 2 seconds. So I think understanding how to use your tool efficiently and effectively is really the best thing you can do to improve your output and productivity in that regard.
I totally agree with that. I have heard of Scrivener. I've never used it, but I am a big Microsoft Word proponent myself. I grew up using that. Some people are more prone to use things like Google Docs because they want the ability to kind of log on to any computer and jot some things down or continue working without feeling like they've got to access, a Word document on their hard drive or something like that. So there's many different ways of doing it, and I totally agree. Find something that works for you, and sometimes, spending more time trying to learn a new piece of software is almost more frustrating and can take up more and consume more of your time than just sticking with what you know?
Absolutely, for sure.
So in terms of length of books, that's the other thing. Like a lot of people are curious to know, like, how many chapters should it be? What's the average length, or what's an acceptable length for the type of book I'm writing? Like, how would they know that? Would that be another market research thing and say, all right, what are other books in this particular niche? What do they look like? How many chapters do they have? How many pages are they writing? I mean, is that something they should consider, or do they just write until it's done? I mean, how do they know when to stop?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, the thing is, like, there's no rules, right? I mean, especially with self-publishing, like, there's no rules about, how many pages your book has to be, how many words it has to be, how big a chapter, how small a chapter should be. There's no rules, right? And so I think part of it, you can learn really quickly by studying the best-selling books in your market. And so one of the things I recommend for all new authors is, like, go to the library, go to a bookstore, and find some books in your market and start looking and going through the pages, and have a physical book. It's a lot easier with a physical book, right? Because then you can see, how many pages is it? How big does it feel? What kind of binding do they use? What kind of colors did they use on the cover? How is the book laid out? You can start reading the first page and the second page and the third page, like the title page and the copyright page, like all the stuff that you never really look at when you're just reading a book. But now as a new writer, as a new author, and going to be publishing your book, you can actually study how are these things built, how are they created, how are they organized, and you can start to learn from those examples, right? But I mean, the truth is there's no real rule. And so I think, the answer for how long should a book be or how long should a chapter be, it should be as long as it needs to be to get the job done.
Right.
So if you're writing a nonfiction book and your promise is you're going to teach your reader how to, get, six-pack abs like you would in the military or something like that, make sure that everything in your book delivers on that promise to your reader. Make sure that you have all the information there for your reader to get those results, and that you're not wasting their time with fluff and nonsense and stuff that's not actually going to help them get those results. So I think it just needs to be as long as it needs to be to get the job done.
And then what do you do in terms of, like, copywriting and how do you protect your work? I mean, you're gonna self-publish it, you're gonna release it on Amazon, but what's preventing anybody from stealing your stuff, basically?
So copyright laws is a big topic, and I'm not an attorney, so I can't give you legal advice. But if you go to copyright.gov, there's tons of good information on there. The thing is, like, when you start writing a document, you own the copyright to anything you create, right? Like, you don't have to register a copyright or file a copyright with the government to own the copyright to your work. You own that, and so when you're publishing your book, you can register a copyright, which is like the formal process you go to fill out a copyright application to get that registration protection for your work. But in my experience, there's a lot of folks who just don't bother with it. Like, honestly, I don't bother copywriting most of my stuff because it's just not worth the time. And there's no real reason I would want that. Like, the only real reason to have that to protect you is, like, if you're going to sue someone, and I'm not planning to go to court, right? Like, that's not my life plan, is to go to court and file all these lawsuits, and it's just not something I want to handle. So I mean, definitely you can study up on that. You can talk to attorneys and get their advice on it. But for me personally, it's just not a part of my plan.
So it can be done, but what I hear you saying is it's really not as critical necessarily as many people might have been led to believe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, the main protection that you get from registering a copyright is that if you were to sue someone for infringing on your copyright and you win that case, which is a big then they have to pay the legal fees, right? But, I was talking to my attorney. I think there's only like a couple hundred cases ever go to court each year in the U.S. So it's not like a common thing to where people are going to go to court and for a copyright infringement, and they're going to win the case, and they're going to have the other person pay their attorney's fees because they registered the copyright, right? Like it's kind of one of those things. It's like, okay, if it happens, it's great. You get, your attorney's fees covered, but what are the chances of that actually happening?
Mm-hmm.
So I think everyone has to kind of go through that thought process for themselves.
Yeah. What's the biggest challenge let's back up. How many folks have you personally trained or have gone through your training program to be authors?
Over 40,000.
Wow. Holy cow. That's a lot of authors out there. What's the success rate of these authors?
It's really hard to tell. I mean, I've got courses on like my own platform, and then I've got courses like on Udemy, which I don't really have control and access to info on all of our students and what they're doing. But I know I've got so many testimonials from folks who are, earning a couple $100 a month, a couple $1,000 a month. I've got lots of folks earning full-time incomes, and several folks are earning 6- and 7-figure incomes from self-publishing their books. So, it covers the gambit in every area. But I think that, the key is, and from my perspective is, like every day I just try to focus on what is my next step? Like what is the next thing I can do to move my success in the right direction? Like there's no guarantees in life. There's no promise in life that if you go down this certain path, you will be successful, you will be rich or whatever. I think the key is to focus on what can you do today to improve your situation. And I think all of my students who are doing that are very thrilled with the results they've gotten, right? And the folks who, they go and they take a course and they forget about it and never implement it, they end up being the ones who are disappointed because they didn't take the action and get those results.
That's right. It's all about action. What's some of the common pain points or struggles that your students have when it comes to self-publishing their books?
I mean, I think the biggest one is just the ignorance. I mean, they just don't know what they're doing, right? They don't know, how a book should be written in the first place. They don't know how it should be laid out. They don't know what a table of contents is. They don't know, what an index is. Like all the stuff that you have to figure out to, get your book looking like a professional manuscript, to get it professionally edited, to find a cover designer, like all the technical stuff, right? I mean, that's what stops most people, is that they don't understand the technical stuff and they're not really willing to learn it. Right. And so I think when they go through like my complete Kindle Publishing course where I walk you through all that stuff step by step, the folks who go through it and actually apply those steps, like it's no longer a problem for them. But I think the other big problem that people have is not a problem of, they don't know what to do, but they know what to do and they know what they should do, but they're not doing what they know they should do. Right. And that is a very common problem. I mean, that's like the universal human condition I found, right? I mean, like I know I'm in like these high-end mastermind groups with entrepreneurs doing 7, 8, 9 figures a year in their business, and I mean, many of them feel the same way a lot of the time,
right?
Like they know they should be doing something, but they're not doing it. Maybe it's something in business, maybe it's working out and taking care of their health, or spending more time with their family and kids. So I think that the key to that for me has been awareness, right? It's like becoming aware when I'm out of balance, becoming aware when I said I was going to write an hour a day and I haven't written in the last month, right? Becoming aware when you've messed up and you've made those mistakes and you're off track. And for me, I do that again with my thinking time process. And so I schedule it in my calendar every single week, at least 15 minutes every single week, to sit down with a pen and paper and notebook and try to keep track of where I am in my life and where I've messed up, where those gaps are, right? Where I said I would do something I wasn't doing it, where I said I wanted better health and I'm not doing the activity that's going to give me that result, right? And so for me, having that awareness and having that structure in my week, that every single week I'm going to at least spend 15 minutes thinking about my life, thinking about where the opportunities are for me to improve, that keeps me on track, so that I might get off track for a couple of days, but I'm not going to get off track for a couple months or a couple of years. And I think that's where most people fall short. And most people end up disappointed is because they stopped writing for a week, and that week turned into a month, that month turned into a year, and 5 years and 10 years and 50 years later, they're looking back at their life wishing they had done something differently. And so that's the process and the structure I've built into my life to make sure that I don't make those huge, huge mistakes over a long period of time.
Yeah, so for those, this is January, 'tis the season for, goals and New Year's resolutions and all of these things. And many folks listening to this have a goal or have aspired at some point in their life to write a book. And perhaps maybe 2017 is that year that they want to finally do something relative to writing their own book. What would you recommend? I mean, what's a time? Obviously, this is a very broad question, and it's going to vary for everyone. But what's a general time frame that it takes somebody from idea to being published? Is this like a year, 2 year process? Is it a month, 2 week? Like, give us kind of a just in your experience with your new students, like what's the length of this process?
So, I mean, from book idea to starting to write your book, I mean, anyone can do that in a week if you just follow the process we talked about in the interview already. From actually sitting down to, writing to getting your outline done, to writing, first word, to finishing the first draft of your manuscript, anyone can do that in 90 days easily. So if you spend 15 minutes a day, every single day, you schedule that in your calendar, 15 minutes a day to write your book once you have your outline done, you can easily knock it out in 90 days, right? Mm-hmm. So then the question is, how long does it take you to find a great editor and, go through the editing process? And that varies for everyone. I mean, some folks, you're already a really skilled writer. You understand grammar. You understand, how to communicate your ideas really effectively and really well. And other folks need a ton of help with that. And so that's going to change kind of the editing timeline. But, if you find a really good editor who's been trained at a Big Five publisher or in journalism, they're a really well-trained editor, they can probably help you get your manuscript edited really well in 30 to 60 days for your first book. And that'll be a couple of different rounds of editing. And, you'll have time in between those rounds of editing to go back and make the changes that the editor will recommend that you make to make your book better. And that could be organizational changes. It could be, writing new chapters or deleting content. It could be all kinds of different issues depending on your book. So I would say all in all, anyone can really start this process and get a new book published within 6 months if they really stick to, at least working on it 15 minutes a day, schedule it in your calendar and commit to that activity. I've seen folks do it in as little as a week, and I've seen other folks, never get it done, right? So, but I think, easily 6 months, anyone can do it from book idea to finished book, ebook, physical book, audiobook, all done and published within 6 months. You can do it if you set your mind to it.
And when it comes to editing, I'm assuming we're not talking about hiring somebody on Fiverr, right?
No way. Absolutely not.
Okay, I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I mean, so here's the thing for me with editors. Like, I will never hire an editor unless they have been really well trained by either a big publisher, so either a Big Five publisher or a medium-sized publisher, or they've been really well trained in journalism for like at least minimum 3 to 5 years. Because, there's so many people out there with creative writing degrees and, all kinds of different degrees. And anyone can fix typos. Anyone can fix grammatical errors in a book, right? But it takes a lot more skill than that to become a really good editor. There's so much more to it than just those simple skills. And so those are the skills that I found that no one really learns unless they've been really well trained in a big publishing company or in the journalism field with, an editor looking over their shoulder, constantly reviewing their work, constantly telling them how to improve their work. If there hasn't been an editor who's gone through that process, they don't really know what it takes to be a great editor. And so that's why I always look for in hiring editors. They have to have gone through that process, right? It's just like in the military, would you want a brand new rookie who's never been in combat to be like, leading your squad in a very dangerous mission? Like, no way, right? You want someone who's been through experience, who's been coached time and time again in many different situations, and they've been through all that incredible experience that you can only get in the field, right? And that's the same way with an editor. And that's one of the biggest mistakes I see folks make, is they just hire their, neighbor's best friend's sister because, she has a fine arts degree and she's really good at grammar, right? But that doesn't mean she's a good editor for your book.
Yeah, I totally agree. I like that. Yeah, and what's the going price for something like that? Again, another broad question is going to vary on where you go, how long the book is, how much work needs to be done, but just in general, what are we looking at spending for an editor?
So the best, highest quality editors who've been through the training, like I just mentioned, the cheapest I found is $100 per 10,000 words, and all the way up to probably $500 per 10,000 words. I think when you get above that price point, above $500 per 10,000 words, you're overspending. No matter how good they are, you're overspending. So somewhere in that range, I try to go for the lower budget range, but it's also different because, I run a publishing company now, so I can go to an editor and I can say, hey, we can basically guarantee you full-time work, right? Because we have so much deal flow, and so we can kind of negotiate slightly better rates. But I would certainly say if you're overpaying, above $500 for 10,000 words, you're getting ripped off, or at least maybe not getting ripped off, but you're paying more than you probably should, right? And if you're paying less than that, you're probably not getting someone who's really the quality you're looking for.
That's very good advice. Very cool. So what services and trainings do you offer for anybody that might be interested in learning from you in the courses, being a member of the 40,000+ students that have already gone through your courses?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer that it's all about the proof, right, and education. And so I have everyone I recommend, go through my free training program at ebookpublishingschool.com. So in that free training program, there's 4 training videos, and I'll walk you through the process to formatting your first book for Amazon, uploading your first book and publishing it on Amazon, launching your book, and building your author platform. And that's all free training at ebookpublishingschool.com. And if you like that, in the last video, you'll hear about, my advanced course, which will walk you through every step of the process from, book idea to writing, publishing, marketing, and more. So that's the best place to start. Other great resource I have for everyone that's free as well is the podcast show. It's called the Publishing Profits Podcast. So every week I interview best-selling authors to share what's working right now in their business to increase their fan base and grow their income. And that's at publishingprofitspodcast.com. And then I also have the publishing company. So for those folks who, you want to write a book and you want to get it published, but you don't want to learn how to go through the entire self-publishing process. You don't want to have to worry about finding great editors and cover designers and distribution and all that stuff. Our publishing company can do that for you. We're very selective with our clients that we pick, but you can check out our submission guidelines and everything at tckpublishing.com.
That's very cool, man. So where do you see TCK in your business heading in the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, good question. So, for me, again, it's really about education. I mean, I want to turn the company into not just a publishing company, but into a company that's really, out there in the field and constantly educating, existing writers, existing authors, and new folks, on the best practices for what's actually working in the industry right now to increase authors' income. Because I think, if you look at the internet, especially like when I started, 5 years ago when I published my first book, everything on the internet for authors was all about, it was all about how that company could sell you their products. They could sell you their services, right? And they didn't really care about teaching people how to increase their income as an author. And that, for me, has always been my focus because that's where I started. I started out as an author myself. And I wanted to help people by sharing what actually worked for me. Like, how did I actually earn money? And it's not about selling products and selling services and selling products. It's about understanding your readers and understanding what they value and creating great books and great content and following some simple strategies that actually worked and not doing the stuff that didn't work. And so that's really my passion for the company, is getting us, focused on creating the best content possible to teach people what's actually working, what they can actually do to improve their situation, improve their life, and get their message out to more people.
That's very cool. If you had a time machine, you can go back and have a conversation with your earlier self. At what point in your life would that be, and what would you say?
That's a funny question. I've heard a similar question before, but I've never picked the point in my life that I would go back to. I would probably go back to like 10 or 11 or something. And I would tell myself that, school is not the most important thing in the world, and that I should be reading more books and I should be studying, and that, I wish so many things, experience I've had in life and so many lessons I've learned in the books I read, I felt like, man, I wish I'd known that earlier. I wish I'd known how to have better relationships earlier. I wish I hadn't been so, mean to my best friends and girlfriends, in high school and in college and as a young adult. It's like so many things in life I wish I just learned sooner on. So it's really hard to pick just one thing. But, one of the things I've learned, Eddie, is that you can never know less, right?
Right.
Once you have knowledge, once you have experience, once you have information, you can never know less. And so that's one of my big drivers today when I'm, reading a new book or studying a new course or learning something new. I'm always reminding myself, once I have this information locked in, it's going to serve me for the rest of my life. And I wish I had gotten that sooner in life, that I had found that passion for learning earlier on in life, because I feel like all the lessons I've learned, they've added value in so many different areas of my life. And, And that's, part of my driving force today to share with other people education is that I want to help other people make better decisions. And I think the way you make better decisions in life is by getting better educated.
Absolutely. Totally agree. Give us a time when, well, just describe for us your biggest, most catastrophic failure.
So, I mean, in terms of business,
it could be
college,
it could be business, it could be personal, it could be whatever. Like the one point in your life you're like, man, so wish I had a do-over for that.
Yeah. So after college, I had been moderately successful. I had basically like a full-time passive income on my small, single dude budget out of college. And I thought I had it made because I was, earning a couple $1,000s every month, and it was more than enough to pay my bills and save and invest. And so I took all my life savings and I raised about $100,000 from friends and family to start a new business. And it just failed miserably. I mean, I basically lost everything, and I earned some money back. And today the company still earns, a couple $1,000s a year, very little. But I never actually got to pay back my investors. And so I actually had to pay them back personally, not from the business proceeds, but personally. And so at the time when, I launched that business and I had, all of my money and $100,000 from friends and family invested in that company, and I was looking at our revenue for that month, and I just realized there was no way this was ever going to work. And that was one of the most kind of embarrassing, disappointing moments of my life. I mean, I was living with my parents, and I went from being, financially free to being in massive amount of debt and wondering how I was going to actually pay this stuff off. So that was for me like the biggest disappointment in my life at that time, for sure.
Knowing what you know now about that situation, and if you did have the opportunity to go back and change it, would you?
I don't think I would change it because I learned so much valuable stuff from it. But yeah, I mean, honestly, like if I could go back, yeah, I would definitely make different decisions knowing what I know now, for sure. And I think what I would one of the biggest lessons I learned from that, Eddie, is that like if you're going to be in business, you need to be in control. And you can't control everything, but the problem with that business was like I couldn't control the revenue. I couldn't control the value we provided to our customers. Like it was all in other companies' hands. Like basically everything was outsourced to some other company, or we were in this position where we couldn't negotiate better terms for what we were buying because we were such a small player in the industry, right? And this was an industry where all the big players are worth multi-billion dollars, right? And there's just no way I could really compete in there without more capital and without a lot more experience. And so, what I would tell folks is like, make sure if you're going to be in business, that there is something you can do every single day to improve the outcome, to increase your revenue, to add more value to your customers, to make better products or services. Because if you can't control that stuff in your business, I just don't see, at least from my experience back then, like I don't see how you could be successful, because that's the stuff you have to do to be successful in business, is to constantly make better products and services, to add more value to your customers, to be able to control your revenue, and to be able to control what you produce and what you give out to the world. If you can't do that, it's really tough to make a business work.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I've got one last question here, and then we'll wrap up. As you know, this is called the Change Your Point of View podcast. And so this last question is around your point of view. Give us a time or an example when you thought something or believed something to be one way, but then a situation or circumstance happened that forced you or caused you to think about it from a totally different perspective. What was that, and what did you learn?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. So, I used to think that marketing was all about selling. Right. The point of marketing is to sell other people, is to get them to do what you want them to do. And what I learned from one of my brilliant business mentors, who's incredibly successful and the gem of a human being, one of the folks who, you would just love to sit down and have a conversation with because he's just such a good person and kind-hearted person. He told me, look, marketing and sales is not about selling. It's about education. If your customer knows enough about your product and service and how it's going to benefit them, if they are well educated enough, they will make a good decision. And so if you have a great product, if you have a great service, if you have something that's really going to add value to people's lives, you don't have to sell them. You don't have to pitch it. You don't have to be, a con man or something like that. Like all you have to do is educate people, give them the information they need to make a good decision, and they will make good choices. And so that's been my focus since then, is to constantly just share education. That's what I do for marketing. That's why I do podcasts like this. That's why I have my own podcast show. That's why we're constantly creating great blog posts and articles and YouTube videos to educate people, because that's what works. And that's what people resonate with. That's what people are going to go share, right? And, the number one reason people buy any product or service is word of mouth, right? And people will share your marketing message. They will share your educational message. If you share it, if you're sharing good content, if you're sharing good information, your audience will share that for you. And that's how you can have really other people doing your work for you in business and growing your business for you, is by creating great educational content. And so that just totally changed my point of view on what marketing is and how to actually do marketing well.
That's awesome. That's very cool, man. Well, folks, you're listening to Tom Corson-Knowles, and he has just shared with us a ton of information, much of which, I have to be honest, was a little self-serving in some of the questions I asked, because this is something that I am very interested in and passionate about, and that is becoming an author. I tell people, well, oftentimes when people say, what's your title or what do you do? I obviously podcast or whatever, but one of my titles is future New York Times bestselling author, right? and people are like, oh, you authored a book? Nope, I haven't written a book yet, but that's something that I aspire to do. And I think that's the important thing too, is if you're chasing the almighty dollar, like if you are interested in becoming an author or whether it's self-published or traditional published, if you want to do it for the sole purpose of making money, I don't know how successful you're going to be with that. I think you really have to start with an idea that you're passionate about. And I think as long as you're chasing that, I think the money will follow. Is that what you see as well, Tom, with your folks that you train?
Absolutely, man. In fact, it's one of the things that I've trained everyone in our company to understand, is that, one of the big red flags we have when a new client comes to us to talk about publishing their book, if the first thing they say is they want to make, $10,000 a month or sell 1 million books, or the first thing they say is like a financial result that they want to achieve, we know they're not going to be a good client. And that's because, in our first 100 clients, all the folks out of our first 100 clients who said, hey, I want to, sell this many books or make this much money, they all failed, right? They all quit before they ever got there. But the folks who said, hey, I just want to help people, I've got this message, I've got this story I think is going to help people and make the world a better place, those are the folks who had, achieved financial success far beyond any of our dreams.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. All right, Tom, where can folks find more about you if they're interested in connecting or just following along? Or obviously all of the links that you shared with us during this podcast will be in the show notes page for the show. But where can people reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, so definitely the best place to go is ebookpublishingschool.com for that free video training series. And then my email, you'll have my email when you go to that site. So you're more than welcome to, respond to me and ask any questions you have. I'm more than happy to help you guys. The other thing that can be awesome is, follow me on social media. So I'm on Twitter, Tom Corson-Knowles, Facebook, Instagram. I've got tons of great content on YouTube as well. So you can just search for Tom Corson-Knowles. That's CORSON-KNOWLES. And yeah, I'm all over the place online. You can't miss me if you Google me. Or anything that spells somewhat similar to my name, you'll find me.
Yeah, there's not very many of you out there, I don't think.
Absolutely.
All right, folks, you can find all of the show notes for this episode by heading over to changeyourpov.com/episode 148. Never miss an episode. Hit subscribe on your podcast player of choice. We have a lot more great content headed your way. Come be a part of our community over at Change Your POV Squad. All right, folks, until next time.